Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are y'all doing? I want you to help me welcome someone that y'all may not know is joining us with today. We got my brother Aaron on stage with us this morning. So glad to have him back. Listen, I want to invite you to stand up. I want to invite you to stretch those legs, stretch those arms. Forget about the worries of your day. Forget about how you walked in, because we're getting ready to change all that this morning. This song says, just a mention of his name. Are y'all ready to have an amazing time this morning? Can I get you, I know it's early, but can I get you to scream and say, I'm ready to have an amazing time? Yeah. All right, Jerry, let's go. Can I get you?
If you walked in sick, you're gonna walk out healed. If you walked in bound, you're gonna walk out free. 'Cause just a mention of his name, just a mention of his name, just a mention of his name, everything can change, everything can change. If you walked in heavy, you're gonna walk out light. If you walked in weary, you're gonna be alright. 'Cause just a mention of his name, just a mention of his name, just a mention of his name, everything can change, everything can change. Come on. If you walked in down, you're gonna walk out.
If you walked in bound, you're gonna walk out. We're so glad you're here with us today. Love for you to continue to stand and sing this with us. People come together, strangers, neighbors, our blood is one. Children of generations, of every nation, of kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Sing it out. Oh, 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 oh,
In this place. Come on, do you really love him? I believe that his spirit is here because you're here.
All you heavens,
yes.
Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Oh yeah. Come on. Swing wide, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Swing wide, sing it out. Swing wide, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Let's sing it out. Say, oh, 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 yes.
don't know about y'all, but if y'all didn't feel some church up in here, I don't know where you guys are at, okay? Because I was feeling it back there, right? One of these days I might jump up here and sing, but then y'all might leave. But anyways, good morning and welcome to Kensington. I'm welcoming you here in person and those of you who are watching us online. So Kensington doesn't have a ton of traditions, but this time of year we have two that are very special to us. And the first one is Thanksgiving baskets. Thanksgiving baskets is our opportunity to move out into the community to provide baskets to those who are in need this Thanksgiving. And you know, we've been doing this for 28 years as we partner with families and our school partners in order to make these things happen. And I know for me, as a single mother of 3 boys, during the holiday season, it gets rough. And I've been blessed in the past to get a basket from Thanksgiving basket from Kensington. And it means the world to me, and it's just such a blessing. And for $50 donation, we provide non-perishable items, and we give each family a gift card so they can go shopping for the things that they love that to make Thanksgiving their own. Now, this is an opportunity not only for you, but for your friends and families or even your small groups. So on November 19th, here at Clinton Township, please come to help prepare baskets and then head out into the community so we can deliver them and bless many people. And I've been blessed to bless people by delivering. And I'm telling you, the smile on those faces when you enter their homes, it just melts your heart and you just see God at work. And so, there's a table in the lobby. If you have any questions, head on out there. They'll answer any questions you may have. And also, if you're a family in need and you consider Kensington your home, please don't hesitate to call our offices. Okay, so the next thing that is important to us here at CT is Thanksgiving midweek. Now, I'm saying this midweek is unlike any of our other midweek services. Adam has an awesome message prepared for us. Charles and his team will be tearing it up on the stage, leading worship as always. And I heard that if you are here on time, there's something special at the start of the service. So you don't want to miss it. So please make sure you join us. Bring your friends, bring your families. Just be ready for an awesome Thanksgiving Eve program. Now, if I spoke too soon, too fast, if there's anything upcoming Kensington that you'd like to know about, upcoming events, serving opportunities, or things about Kensington in general, head out to the center of the lobby at the hub. There are these beautiful, amazing volunteers that wear such fancy orange shirts, and they would love to help you with anything that you have. And if this is your first time visiting Kensington, we have a little something special for you as our way of saying thank you for being with us today. So today starts the series of table talks, and Adam will be talking about how it's okay to have a messy table. And Lord knows I have had my share of mess. And one thing with that, God has always been present. And the most you can just sit back and say, but God, that is one of those things. And he always wants us to draw near to him when we're in our mess. But before we get into that, stand up, greet your neighbors, and share what your favorite Thanksgiving entree is. Now, I'm not on the pumpkin band, but sweet potato pie, all right?
Good morning, how are y'all? Oh, can get that mic on, there it is. How's everybody doing? Thanks, front row. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name's Adam. I'm part of the team here at CT. Just so glad that you are here. I don't know about y'all, but I'm a little bit of a pot stirrer. I like to stir things, create a little controversy. So I'm gonna start out by this, and I'm really apologizing in advance, because for however many years I'm here, you're gonna hear this same thing year after year when it comes to the best Thanksgiving dish or entree. It's canned cranberry sauce. We need to separate the room to the people that follow Jesus, the canned cranberries and the others. So could we No, so listen, I'm sure a lot of you will come after me and you want to talk about your great auntie or your grandma and how when they put just the right type of, clove or cinnamon in the chutney, it just sings. I'm sorry. It doesn't sing as much as opening the can and then hearing that right down on the plate. And if you're fancy, like in my house, we cut it up, right? Because then it doesn't have the same appearance, right? But we love the way that table looks, right, at Thanksgiving. It's so beautiful at the front and it's good, but if you're anything like mine towards the end, right, it's a little bit messy. Things are kind of off. I don't even want to move it, right, because it's so nice. But things get a little bit of dirty. But we spend a lot of time around tables, right, in some capacity in our life. Like I know growing up that I spent a ton of time around the table. Most of it was eating. You wouldn't think that by this stature, but I'm telling you, we could really put it down in the Karshner households. But we did far more than just eat around the table. I remember my dad would gather us and we would have fun around the table, right? Or we'd learn around the table. Some of the biggest lessons I remember learning were around the table. My dad taught me, he taught my siblings, all of us about finances and business. My dad was a businessman, so he would take a lot of those principles and he would teach them to us around the table, right? We would have conversations about life around the table, and actually sometimes we even got disciplined around the table, which in the Karshner household was pretty good if you were younger, because if you were disciplined at the table, it meant you were not sent to the bathroom, right? And yeah, some of you are giggling because you know what happens in the bathroom. Like bathroom is where real discipline goes down. And I'm sure you have lots of stories of different dynamics that happen at your table. Like our table was fun too. You play games around the table and it gets messy, but most of us, I would say, we really like our table to kind of be more like that. It might not have all the fancy elegantness, I don't know if that's a word, but it is gonna be for today, of like pre-Thanksgiving, pre-Christmas, right? Where it's super well decorated, super well dressed, but we would rather live in an existence where the table is much more clean. But I don't know about y'all, my tables get a little bit messy. As a matter of fact, we have 2 tables in our house. Any of y'all have that? You have 2 tables? One that sits in the dining room and you never, ever, ever, ever use it, except for those 2 holidays. And if you were a kid, you never sat at a table like this, right? Anybody? Trauma? Never sitting? We went to Canada for the first time in a couple of years yesterday with my wife, and there was an adult table and a kid table, and I realized I'd finally graduated. I was no longer relinquished to the table in the kitchen or the card table or whatever it was. And it was nice to sit at that table while all the kids were being in their messy space, right? But what if this isn't the table that we always need to exist at? What if life in some way, like it's good to have moments and it's good where we clean up, but a lot more of the time that we are in could kind of be spent around a messy table. I have a picture of the second table in our house. Can you throw that up in the back? So it's not super messy at the moment, but this is from IKEA, and my wife hates this table in some capacity, and those are some of my message notes, and I typically do not always clean up after myself and put my books back. Any of you OCD perfectionists in here? Raise your hand. I see you in the back. So my wife tends to fall into a little bit of that category. So this could be a contentious place for us. And I'm a little OCD as well. But you see, because this is the problem I have with this table. Do you see the markers kind of at the far end spot? Like that's what happens when our kids get at the table. Because they make the table messy, and even in my OCD-ness, I found myself really frustrated. At first, my kids for doing it, and then myself and April, because if I just put a little bit of lacquer on that table or some kind of finish, all of that would have wiped off. And I feel like a lot of us in the room can relate to that, because this is why. We like clean tables. We like everything to be neat and tidy. We like it to be put in order. We like it to be functioning well. And all of us have this table that's kind of like literal as these, but then there's this proverbial table that represents our life. And we like our tables to be neat. Clean expectations, right? Clean the whole way around, because life is just simpler when it's clean. And we like it like that. We like simple. We like the lack of process that comes with that. But I just wonder about like Jesus in his time here today. When Jesus came, if anybody had an immaculate table, this is what Jesus's would have looked like. Like none of us in some capacity would ever probably come to the place where everything is so perfectly aligned. But what I find when we look at Jesus in his ministry is he would leave, in essence, the clean, the tidy, the wonderful table, and he would start to wade into some messes, which just leaves me to wonder. Is there something in our lives that we could learn from that? Is there some kind of table that maybe he wants us to press in that's a little bit different than what it was that we would desire? That's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, I want to take a minute and pray and then receive our offering. So would you guys just bow your heads with me? Lord, I thank you for today. I thank you for the way that you love. I thank you for the way that you've just even taught me about tables today. My heart for all of us is that we see a little bit of yours as we hear today what it is that you said and how you interacted with people. My prayer is that all of us would learn a little bit more, be driven closer to you because of it. And I ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So our ushers are around, and they're going to start passing these pouches. And first, let me say, hey, if you're a guest, like this is your second, third, first time here, whatever it is, we want you to feel no obligation to participate in this part. You grab that thing and you pass it right on by to the next person and don't think anything of it. But for those of you who are on mission, we want to say thank you to you and how you give. Some of our guests, we know that you will contribute today too. Really appreciative. And if you weren't prepared and you want to give, you can text the number on the screen, use our app, go online, or you can always drop a check in the mail or something like that. But I just want to share a quick story of some of the things that are happening in our church. I all know that we just experienced Halloween. Anybody get poured on when they went trick-or-treating? Yeah, but it was warm, right? So it wasn't too big a deal. Well, we had a trunk-or-treat event here, and we didn't count the number, and I'm really trying not to do pastor math here, but there was probably somewhere between 600 and 1,000 people that came through our door, and it was a fantastic time. We got to see kids come. And honestly, we didn't really share a message. We just want people to understand that this is a place where they can come in wherever they are, whatever their table, quote unquote, feels like, and feel cared for and enter in, because that's kind of who we want to be. That's what we're going to talk about today. But the only reason we could do any of that, pass out candy, or the people that came and made stations to hand something out and just kind of live or act on people in such a way that reflects Jesus' life, is because of those of you who are on mission with us. So truly thank you for what it is that you do, because none of this happens without all of you helping us and being a part of what goes on in this space. All right, so today we're talking about tables, and we're going to look at a particular table that Jesus sat around with an interesting group of people. And this table is kind of the foundational part of this series, because what it does, I think, in a really great way is detail what God's heart, what Jesus' heart is to every single one of us, whether we are a follower of his or somebody who is far, far distant from him. And before we get into the text, I want to just give you a little bit of context of where Jesus is in his ministry, which is pretty early on. Like, I don't know the exact time frame. I'm going to assume it's probably in the first year, because what we do know is he hasn't actually accumulated all of his disciples at this point, but he has some of them. He's called some of them to follow him, and where they are a little different than the normal person that would get called by a rabbi or a teacher, Jesus hasn't really ventured out into really crazy waters where anybody would say, I can't even remotely believe that he would ask a person like that to be a part of his crew. And what he's doing is he's kind of showing people who he is. So he's doing miraculous work after miraculous work. The one he has just done, he's kind of challenged the Pharisees, which is one of his favorite things, and told to them about how he can forgive sin because of who he is. And as he leaves that place, he goes to another instance, because there's a table, there's people that he wants to get around, because he has a message for them. It's a message that would change their life and is just applicable for all of us today as it was then. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 9, starting at verse 9, and let's read the text together to see what it is that Jesus does. So as Jesus passed on from the place where he'd done that previous miracle, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at a tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. Seems like a pretty just normal verse. And in our Western, couple of thousand years later context, we could read that and pass right by. But there are so many critical details in this text that just get missed on us. And the first one is even this act of Jesus calling somebody to follow him. Like, if any of you ever read the Bible and thought it seems so strange that these random workers were asked by Jesus to follow him, and they just threw down their professions, their livelihoods, and started to follow them. Has anybody ever thought that? Or it's just me? Yeah, a couple of you. Well, that's because in this culture, a rabbi or a teacher, which is what Jesus would have been looking for a group of people to kind of be his disciples, to learn from them. And Jesus was no exception. But normally, the rabbis looked different than Jesus. They were dressed much nicer, the way a lot of us present today, where Jesus kind of was homeless, but he had this teaching that people wanted to find themselves surrounded by. So he starts calling people, and he calls fishermen and other people with normal professions, was very different. But in this moment, he goes to somebody else, a tax collector. A tax collector would have been incredibly, we can't even contextualize what is happening in this moment when Jesus asks Matthew to follow him. Because I imagine it like this. Like, Jesus is in tote with his other disciples. They're walking around, and he sees Matthew sitting in his booth. And he walks over to Matthew and he says, follow me. And his disciples are probably actually, I say they're taken back. Their breath's gone. They don't even know what to say. And pretty quickly they move from shocked to infuriated. And the reason that is because what a tax collector was doing in this context. I know we've talked about this a bit, but for those of you that don't understand, basically what a tax collector did was serve the occupying country, Rome, and would take from the Jewish people. Practically what they did is they purchased the rights from Rome to collect taxes. So they would collect what Rome said, and then they could add anything they wanted onto it in order to benefit themselves. And these men got filthy, stinking rich from doing it. They burdened their people. I'm telling you, families were torn apart. I believe people were thrown in jail because they couldn't meet the tax burden. And a lot of times that came from their own countrymen wanting more and throwing them in prison because they couldn't meet it. Because you know, if you do this, other people are going to see and they'll go to all kinds of extremes and efforts. So Matthew is one of these individuals. And Jesus has just approached him and said, you follow me. I'm inviting you to be a part of this. And what's interesting, he doesn't tell Matthew every way is wrong. He doesn't say, your table looks nothing like this. What we're going to need to do is you're going to have to proceed through step A, B, C, D, and E, and then you can follow me. That's not at all what Jesus does. And in that, we see Jesus asking Matthew to follow him, which was significant and shocking to everyone who was watching. I just wonder how that played out. Like the guy's sneering and looking at Matthew and giving him dirty looks, but he's next to Jesus and they start to walk. And I imagine this discipleship process starts to begin. Jesus starts to talk about Matthew, and I don't think he weighs right into the dirty mess that Matthew's life is, but at some point they did get to that. At some point, he started to talk to him about what he had done to his countrymen, the path that he was on and what it had taken to him. And I think Matthew starts to realize how empty he is. I think actually Matthew had thought about this a lot even leading up to this point. And he was kind of primed and ready for this moment that Jesus was willing to ask him, because think of what he gave up. Like the moment he walked away from that booth, he quit his job, he gave up his financial wealth and establishment and everything in order to follow Jesus, because he was going to turn into a traveler, and everything that he had was now going to be gone. But the other thing about Matthew is his life was messy. Matthew's life was messy and dirty. It was not elegant. The path that he had chosen had led him to a bad place. But in the middle of that, Jesus presses in and not only invites him to follow him, but actually invites him to be in part of his inner circle. Like, we don't understand. Matthew's table, if we dressed it up here and you came and you smelt it, it would make you gag. It would be dirty, disgusting, rotting food, and we probably wouldn't even be able to stand in the midst of it. But Jesus sees all of that. He doesn't care. He doesn't tell Matthew he has to figure it out. He just simply says to him, follow me. Pretty big ethic in God's kingdom, in the kingdom of Jesus, that is shown in this moment. Because here's the other thing. I think Jesus, man, he had a plan for Matthew's life. There was a way that he wanted Matthew to go, a way that he wanted him to live. And when he looked at Matthew in the booth, I think his heart was breaking. I think he'd seen Matthew at other times, and he knew there was something better. A plan that he had for Matthew, and he wanted to invite him into that. And Matthew was in that growing process that we talked about in our last series. I think he had started to seek Jesus, even if he didn't quite understand what it was. And because of it, when the opportunity came, he was primed and ready to jump in and go on this journey with Jesus, where something is happening as he's starting to walk with him. And as the account continues, Matthew and Jesus actually go back to what I'm going to assume is Matthew's house. It's not specifically stated, but Matthew invites a bunch of people to come there as well, and they're people just like him. Other tax collectors and other sinners. And in this interaction, we get to go a little bit deeper and see Jesus' heart. Verse 10 says this: Jesus is reclining at the table in the house, and behold, many tax collectors and sinners came, and they were reclining with him and his disciples. See, what can happen with this verse is just like that first one, is we can quickly glance over it and think of it just as informative. But you have to understand what is happening in the table in the background. Like, listen, I'm sure the disciples at this point can't even stand it. Like, I know we have a lot of vitriol in our society, like political, but there's nothing in our context that I think can justify or kind of examine or explain to us the dynamic existing between these two parties. Like, the disciples hated Matthew. I'm sure they had friends that lost their livelihood, that lost their families because of him or his friends. So when they're at this table, Jesus is communicating something to them about the value in his kingdom, and I don't think they were ready for it. I think they're pretty frustrated. I think they're pretty upset. They're wondering what it is that Jesus would be doing with that. And in this moment, he communicates something to them, and that is this. Jesus sat at messy tables. You see, if anyone had the right or the privilege to be at a table for every meal that looked like that, it was Jesus, because this is what his life did. But Jesus constantly got out of his seat and he left this space to push into other table. And that is what he is doing with Matthew. And as he started to accumulate a small group of men that would be his followers, he is teaching them something. He's teaching them about what it is he thinks of others and how much he values leaving what's clean, what's beautiful, what's nice, what's simple, and pressing into the deep mess because it was a value of his kingdom. And it wasn't just Matthew a part of this. It wasn't just the disciples. Some of those religious leaders caught wind of this. I'm not sure exactly what had happened. Like, I wouldn't doubt that this caused a stir. Hey, that Jesus, you should see who he's sitting with. And it starts to move throughout the town. And they hear about it, and they pull up their fancy robes, and they start waddling over to see what it is that is going on. And as they do, they, I think, can sense the disciples' frustration is what is happening. And the text doesn't tell us this, but I imagine this is how it happens. They kind of weasel over to the disciples and they quietly say, hey, what's going on here? And we see that in verse 11. It says this, when the Pharisees, that's those religious leaders, saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Why would he do something like that? Why wouldn't he hang out with people like us? Like even you guys are okay. Like people whose life is much more focused and looking like this than people that would exist in a disgusting table that none of us would want to sit at, smell, more or less be around. But Jesus hears what it is that they're saying. Verses 12 through 13 says this, but when Jesus heard it, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners. And in this dynamic, in this interaction, Jesus is reminding the religious leaders of who he was there for and who God has always been there for. See, God has always been there for those with a messy table. But I think what we can also do is miss something in this verse, in this context. See, we look at it and we think that Jesus was saying, I came to sit with these people, not with y'all, because you're cleaned up. You're the religious leaders. You're the ones who know something about this. So that's why I'm hanging out with them. And if we think that, we miss out on a huge component of what it was that Jesus wanted to tell them. You see, when Jesus says, go and understand what this means, or the verse specifically says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, he was quoting an Old Testament prophet, a man by the name of Hosea. And Hosea would have been a person who was incredibly familiar to these religious leaders and Pharisees. They knew all about his story. Some of them probably had this book that Hosea wrote completely memorized. And that message, those words of desiring mercy and not sacrifice, was something Jesus wanted to communicate to these men. He's like, yo, your table doesn't look like this. Your table's quite a bit different. And Jesus, even in that moment, was trying to do for them exactly what it was he was doing for Matthew. Because in the context of that, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, there were some other things that Hosea said that these men would have known about. The first was this. In that dynamic, Hosea the prophet had been encouraging the people of Israel, who Hosea wrote to turn from their wicked ways. He's like, y'all are jacked up. You've been doing things, you're wandering away, and his invitation is God is gently calling you back. He wants to invite you back into relationship with them. He actually refers to them as dew, and this is what he means. He says, it sparkles until the sun hits it. It's beautiful and it's pretty, and then when any real thing comes, it disappears. Very quickly, it's gone. He says, the way you guys are acting is actually not a lot different than Matthew. Yeah, like Matthew has issues. These people have issues. But you have some issues yourself. But you've gotten so holy, so legalistic, that you've missed every single part. And you can't see what your table looks like. Any of you, like ever in your house, or maybe you go into somebody else's space and you're like, oh, wow. I've grown accustomed to a smell or an odor, but somebody comes in, hopefully it's a family member who can be gentle to you, and it's like, wow, this room is awful. See that, yes, some of those like little giggles, y'all are like, yeah, but I don't want to admit it in front of a room full of everybody. See, that's what's happening with the religious leaders in this moment, but they don't see it. They don't realize that their table doesn't look like this, that their table is vile and their table is dirty. But Jesus, in this proclamation of what Hosea said, is trying to remember that, or trying to teach that to them. When he says, I came for the sick and not the healthy, he's communicating them that they are not healthy. And in it, we see another ethic, another value of the kingdom of heaven, and it's this. Jesus is always inviting us in. There's always more room. There's never a moment where you can't be a part of his table, where you have to be relinquished to the kiddie room, where you're sent off because you just don't have it yet, because you haven't figured out all the commands. There's never a moment in any of our lives where Jesus makes us get up and leave to go sit at the children's table. His invitation is not exclusive, and it's not one that you can only take when you've been cleaned up and properly formed. It's for everyone regardless of where you are. You see, at some point in your life and some point in my life, our table is messy. I think actually we probably go through cycles where it gets a little bit dirty again. And the whole time, regardless of what it is that we've gone through, Jesus' invitation is to invite us back. But here's the other problem. When we do start to clean up our table, when it gets a little bit of tidiness, we like that. We like to exist. We like to live at a table like that. And it is incredibly hard to leave something like that to then press into another kind of mess. But Jesus wanted his disciples, the religious leaders, Matthew, his tax collector friend, and his sinners, all to understand. But in life, for somebody who's committing to being a follower of Jesus, when we get to the best places and our table is looking a lot like this one, Jesus' invitation is not for us to stay here. It's not to hang out in what is clean and what is put together and what is nice, what is simple. The invitation is to wade back into the mess, to help other people with whatever it is that they are a part of. That is Jesus' invitation to every single one of us. When he found a messy table, he invited its owners in. He helped them clean up in their mess, because with Jesus, you didn't have to be all cleaned up. His message was, you can belong before you believe. You can be a part of this even if you don't quite see and understand everything. And if you want to challenge me on that, I would refer you back to Matthew 9:9. Matthew didn't have it all together. Let's read it. What did he say? As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. I'll bet you Jesus never had a conversation with Matthew. I'll bet you to this point he'd seen him, maybe made some eye contact, maybe a passing word at the most. But Jesus had never had an opportunity to interact with Matthew, to tell him all the things that he did was wrong. And I don't think even if he did, that would have been the first thing that Jesus approached him with, because that's not in any of Jesus's interactions except for with some of the religious leaders who should have, quote unquote, known better how he handled it. Jesus approached him and demonstrated that he had a great love for him in order to show him there was a better way. And in this, we see that. He doesn't say, hey, Matthew, you need to clean up. Hey, Matthew, you need to get it all together. What does he say? Follow me. The very first words he extends to Matthew are that. There was no litmus test. There was no box of things that Matthew had to check and to get right before he could be invited into literally the greatest inner circle that the world has ever known. And I think in that we see this massive value that is important to Jesus, that he wants us invited in. Like, the problem is for some of us, we can go both ways with that. Either we don't want to invite people in, or when we invite them in, when we invite ourselves to be a part of that, we say, well, I'm good. But that's not the truth. In that, Jesus wants to help clean us up. He doesn't want to invite us in to leave us exactly where it is that we sit. As we seek him, after we believe and we get to know him and we know the values of his kingdom, it will lead to us understanding how much he loves us. And when we understand how much he loves us, we realize that the teachings and the commandments and the things that he charges us to do aren't to ruin our good time. It's not because he has this legalistic kind of not so fun attitude. It's because he knows what will bring us real life, real joy. We get to see that in Matthew. Matthew had pursued everything that he thought was important. He'd gone after what he thought would offer him lasting joy and happiness, and he realized it didn't. So when Jesus says, follow me, he's inviting him to turn over the things of the world, not all at once, because it's never how it works with any of us. It's a process, it's a journey, but he had a better plan. He had a better hope. He had a better desire for Matthew in this moment. And what he wanted for Matthew is what he wanted for every single one of us. So first, let me say this. If you're in this room and you are not a follower of Jesus, maybe you're just here because you're curious or whatever it is, I want to say, I know the church has not done a good job of communicating this message. There are a lot of you who have been in places with people, Christians, pastors, and I think they're all incredibly well-meaning, but the message that they've communicated is you got to look a lot like this before you can be a part of Jesus' table. Like, you need to clean up, you need to have a shower, you need to get rid of your dirt and your grime, and then you can come sit in the table. But I just don't think that's true, because when I look at this reaction and every other interaction that Jesus had with somebody, he invited them to come, to follow him, to be there, and to bring their mess. Because he doesn't want to leave us in the mess. He wants to be the part of helping us. And what we do is we get it twisted because we think after we believe, it moves right into obedience. But that's not how it works, because obedience without relationship will crush any single one of us. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter the person. If you don't have a relationship dynamic with them and they start to tell you what to do, I feel like I can speak for all of us in saying it's not going to go real well. That doesn't happen in life. Like, think of a relationship you had with a boss. If there's an authority there that they can tell you and you have to follow, but you don't see it as good, you don't see it as beneficial, you see it as authoritarian dictator. And Jesus never wants to approach any of us with that type of dynamic. But regardless of the fact of where you are, what Jesus says to you, if you're not a follower of his, is the same as he says to Matthew. Follow me. If you believe and if you start to seek me, as you seek me, you will get to know me. You won't just know about me, you'll have an experiential understanding of who I am. And in that, you'll see how much I love you. And when you understand how much he loves, it will unlock something inside of us to live love, to love others, and actually helps us not just to obey out of obligation, but to have a desire to want to follow his teachings. And it will be a journey that every single one of us go through and exist on for as long as we are followers. If you don't know Jesus, if you've been here and you're curious, that is his message to you, and is exactly the same as it was to Matthew's as he interacted with him 2,000 years ago. But I also want to share a message with those of you that call this place home. Like, you would say, I'm a committed follower and I want to be in this place. Like, this is going to be a place where our table does not look like this all the time. We are going to mess it up. Yeah, right? Nope. We are going to live in such a way, I better not do that, the band will fall on it, where the table gets dirty. We're going to invite people in with their mess, with all of their problems, with all of the things, because honestly, that's what Jesus did for every single one of us. So when we see somebody that's living a lifestyle that's outside of this, our challenge to them is you don't have to clean up. We're not here to tell you. We're not here to beat or obligate or do anything. We just want to invite you in to belong here before you even believe. Because that is what Jesus did for others as he interacted with them in this society. And it just makes me wonder, what if in this interaction, what if in this account, Jesus was revealing what it was that his kingdom was really about? And that's God's kingdom offers messy people with messy pasts and messy beliefs a place at the table, a place where they can belong, a place where they can grow, a place where they can even doubt until they come to that place to discover. See, this is what we're gonna be as a church. Doesn't matter what your table looks like, doesn't matter how dirty it is, doesn't matter how unelegant it is when compared to the others, we're extending an invitation. And the invitation is, just like a lot of times we would pull this together and put a leaf and make it pretty, I don't think that's how God did it. In every one of his interactions with his disciples, when he invited them into something, he was saying, bring your dirt, bring your mess, bring your disaster, bring every part of you as poorly it is. And I'm not coming here to yell at you. Sorry for me getting a little excited. I'm not coming here to belittle you. I'm not coming here to tear you down. What I'm coming to do is invite you just as you are, with all of your doubts, with all of your discouragements, with all the things that you're not sure if you can believe. And I want you to extend it to my table. You see, this is like one of those big Thanksgiving tables that we have, and the adults get to sit up here and it gets dirtier and dirtier, and the kids are down here at the card table, right? But what Jesus says is he wants to extend his table, and his is the only one that will ever look like that. But in the process, he's inviting every single one of us, regardless of our problems, our dirt, our disgustingness, and he wants us to belong to him. Even he wants us to come to this place where we can belong. And in this church, even if you don't believe exactly what we believe, even if you don't sit at the place where you believe Jesus is the Son of God, yeah, I'm telling you, even if you never get there, this is a place where you can belong. This is a place where you can be on mission with us. You can serve. You can do different things with us, because what we believe is just like Matthew, Jesus has invited all people with all problems, all issues, all dynamics to be a part of his table, regardless of what their life looked like. This is something that's important to us. This is something that's of value in our kingdom. But in this, we also believe that Jesus is going to invite you into something else. That as he does this, he wants to show you a different kind of way. So your table will start to be a little different. That it'll start to be cleaned up. And as that does, we think Jesus extends an invitation where he says, I want you to believe. And as you believe, there's the next step. And it's this thing called baptism. We're going to have a service in a couple of weeks where we want people who have decided that they are going to believe, even if they're not sure on everything else, because Jesus doesn't tell you, even after you believe that you have it all together, to make a public declaration that their life isn't theirs and they want to follow him, even if they're not sure entirely what that means. Even if that means there'll be some doubts, discovery that happens in the process, they want to openly declare that their life is no longer theirs. That it's about serving Jesus, even if their table isn't all cleaned up and even if they don't have it all together. I know a lot of you have been following, and maybe you haven't taken that step of baptism, or maybe you were baptized as a baby. And I just want to say, listen, if your parents did that with you, they loved you. They had a deep desire for you to know and understand this message. But when we look at all the interactions in Scripture, we see it's people, children and adults making a conscious decision of their own that they want to follow Jesus. So our hope is that you'll take that step, that you'll go to the hub, you'll go to our website, which is kensington.org/baptism, get information, talk with somebody, because we really believe this can be a springboard that pushes us into our faith, into this growing process where we're seeking, coming to know, love, which leads to obedience. But listen, at the end of it, this is what I want to say. No matter where you are, don't matter what you've done, don't matter what you believe, Jesus' invitation was people come and be close to him, and you could belong even before you believed. As long as I'm here, and I'm not speaking for me, I'm speaking for the greater leadership, that's what this place is going to be. You don't have to have it all together. You don't even have to believe what we believe, but you can come and you can be at this place. And the reason we are living like that is because that's what we saw Jesus model in his life when he was here. And because Jesus did it, that's what we're going to do. This is going to be a place which reflects the values of his kingdoms. And we think in it that some of us will be invited into the mess, some of us will be cleaned up, and we're all going to go on this cycle. We're going to be in this journey where we're constantly getting dirty and getting cleaned up. And you know what? There's beauty in that. There's beauty in that, because that is the plan that heaven created so that a lost world will know who Jesus is, how he died for us, and how much he loves us. Let's pray. Lord, there's something in me that just thinks of what you did for Matthew and how my story and probably all of ours is really similar. I think for a lot of years we probably looked at this passage and think that we're clean like the Pharisees. But in it, you just extended an invitation for all of us to come, be present, be close to you. I know that my life gets dirty, and I pray that you'd help me to see that, help me to see and look at where it is so that you can help me to get clean. But I also want to be a person that wades into the mess. It's okay getting into it up to my knees. And my prayer and hope is that those of us here at this church would want to do that as well. That there would be things that happen in our lives, in our communities, in our families, because we pressed in to people in their booths, wherever they were, didn't give them a litmus test the way that you did. Show us what it means to do that. Help us all to live a life that reflects you. I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Jesus is called. Have you come to the end of yourself? Do you thirst for a drink from the well? Jesus is called. Sing, oh come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was brought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ.
Leave behind your regrets and mistakes. Come today, there's no reason to wait. Jesus is calling. Bring your sorrows and trade them for joy. From the ashes a new life is born. Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, what a Savior. Isn't he wonderful? Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Bow down before him, for he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Oh, what a Savior. Isn't he wonderful? Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Bow down before him, for he is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah. Sing hallelujah. Christ is risen. Listen, if you're here and you made that decision to follow Christ, we want to celebrate with you. We want to end this service with a bang. We want you to clap those hands and celebrate because he is amazing. And if you did that, you now have a testimony. Yeah. I saw Satan fall like lightning. I saw darkness run for cover. But the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. Yeah. I believe in signs and wonders. Oh, I'm gonna get excited on this one.
I have resurrection power.
Hey, yes I do. Still the miracle that I just can't get over. Your name is registered in heaven. My praise belongs to you forever.
This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Yes, our God will finish what He started. Come on, this is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. Over here. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Hey, come on, you can clap those hands with us. Hey, I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. You're not done, no. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. Help me say, I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. If you still have life, He's not done with you yet. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. My best days are ahead of me. Yeah. Oh, this is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. Hey. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. Oh, I'm alive. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. I see you, Adam. I see you, Adam. Hey, come on if you got a testimony. Somebody give your gun a shot. Yeah.
I think my favorite part of that song is if I'm not dead, you're not done, right? And there's just a reality that it doesn't matter where you are in your journey, what your table looks like, that God is continuously inviting us into something. And if we're gonna have our prayer team come down the front, if you want somebody to pray for you, or you just have some questions about what we've talked about, we would love for you to come and let one of them chat with you. But also, if you wanna take the next step of just being a part of a baptism and you need to chat with somebody, stop at the hub, grab somebody on staff. If you just want to register, you have questions, you can go to our website /baptism and get all that info. Because really, this is what I believe, that there's these pivotal moments that God kind of uses as a springboard in our life to shoot us into something else. And a Sunday or a baptism, these can all be a part of it. And what it is, he's inviting you to be a part of his table, even with our mess, so that we can press into the rest of life with the messiness that it is. Don't let life go by without doing it, because if you do, you will miss out on one of the greatest joy that God ever has for any one of us. So glad you were here with us today. Hope you'll be back next week where we will continue in our Table Talk series. But until then, have a great Sunday, and we'll see you all back here next time.